That tells you that there is something out there.
Pretty hard to spoof that.
Absolutely. Los Alamos, Oak Ridge National Labs, MacDill Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, the remote test site in Nevada, also known as Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That's the actual terminology for Groom Lake facility.
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
I don't know who's building it, who's got the technology, who's got the brains, but there's something out there that better than our airplane.
So it's not us. That's one thing we know.
We know that.
I could say that with a very high degree of confidence.
For someone to try to bust down the walls, it's not going to happen. You'd have to go to all these facilities, get into their vaults, then bring that out as a united coalition. Not one person couldn't do it. It would take a united coalition of acknowledged scientists to come forward with it. Thank you, everyone, for joining me this evening, and thank you for the subscriptions. I really appreciate the help growing this channel. So I've prepared 4 additional cases for you. I have the references, the paperwork, the newspaper clippings to back them up. So we'll begin with our first case here. This is November 20th, 1956, Danielson, Connecticut. Primary eyewitness was outside at night when she noticed this light approaching her house. And as it got closer, it wasn't just this light, but it was a 25-foot wide half dome, kind of looked like a basketball or a beach ball cut in half. It was 10 feet high, 25 feet across. It started coming near her house location and over the grass, started going up. She thought it might hit the chimney, but it cleared the chimney, and then it stopped and parked itself over her house. And ladies and gentlemen, she got a really good look at the bottom of this craft. And that's what I want to talk about here as we move through these slides. We'll move on to the next slide now. Now you can see it had this indented floor on the bottom that was about 2 feet indented into the bottom of the craft. It kind of had a translucent appearance. And then she said it had 24, you could call them vanity lights, that were rotating clockwise. And each vanity light had a different color to it. But each light was connected to what she called a socket. And we're going to move on to the next slide here. I'm going to show you some additional details here. We're going to zoom into these sockets, and you can see, ladies and gentlemen, that it was consisting of 3 what looked like donuts. And then between each donut, there was a black band. Again, there was a different color for each one of these sockets. Now we'll go on to the next slide, and I'll show you an enlargement here. We're doing enlargement. Okay, so here is what these sockets look like. And you can see on the bottom of each one of these gold colored donuts, there was a very strange inscription that kind of looked like a Persian rug border, Oriental rug border. It also looked like Mayan or Inca pottery designs. That's what it reminded her of. And you can see each donut was separated by a black band. Now we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide here. You can see this is her original sketch. She did such a really good job on this, and reference for this is Rundle Stevens' collection. But if you take a look at this sketch, really nice notations, great drawing. She really attempted to vet out the inscriptions and detailing and all this Aztec lettering and inscription and designs on the bottom of these donuts. She just really did a fantastic job. So what I did is I took her information, I did a 3-view drawing, did a SolidWorks model. Credit goes to Tom Bogan for doing the full color illustration. But we want to move on to the next slide here, and we'll show you what this thing actually looks like. Okay, so here we can see the clockwise rotation of the craft itself. We've got all the sockets on the bottom. And on the upper left-hand view, I've shown you these donuts with the black bands, and then the inscriptions below there. And then off to the right, I've done an enlargement so you can see what these things actually look like. And I'll read this word for word here. Resembled an ancient Arabic language, also looked like the border of a Persian or Oriental rug, reference design seen on Mayan or Incan pottery. That's what she described seeing. Very well done case. And I think we can really bank on this one. So let's go ahead and move on to the next case. All right, so this is the famous Father Gill case, Papua New Guinea, June 26, 1959. Now I want to point out that Father Gill was the primary eyewitness, but there were 24 other eyewitnesses to back this up. So, you know, at least 25 eyewitnesses total. So it's around 6 p.m. at night, and Father Gill is alerted to a strange craft hovering over the mission. And the craft was described as being like a 2-tiered wedding cake, which you see in this illustration here. So it's 35 feet in diameter for the bottom tier of the wedding cake. The top tier was about 20 feet in diameter. It had these poles or legs sticking out, which to this day, we don't know if those are landing gear legs. They could be lights that stopped in midair, because we've had multiple cases of these UFOs that have lights that stop like in midair. That's something we've heard of too. Now, there were 4 men, described as men, up on the top deck of this craft. 2 of them were forward on the forward lip of the top deck. The other 2 were further back toward the center. They were slightly obscured, and it looked like they were setting up some type of machinery. Okay, it's so weird. Now, another description for this entire case is something called "they wave back." That's also what this case is called, "they wave back." So what Father Gill did is he put his arm above his head and he was waving to these guys on the top deck, and they actually waved back. So this is a CE1 case, it's a CE3 case because there's beings involved. Now, what happened next is he had a flashlight and he was waving this flashlight in the direction of the craft, and it responded and started moving kind of in the same rate as the flashlight. Now we'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so here's the reference of the map showing you where this took place. You can see Northwest New Guinea, and if you look at the bottom right, those are the villages where this actually took place. We'll move on to the next slide, and I'll do an enlargement here. You can kind of get a view here. So if you look at Goodenough Bay, where it's inscription there, and then you look just south of there, that's exactly the area that we're talking about here. We'll move on to the next slide. I'll enlarge it for you. And here you see the sketch of what this craft looked like, emanating this light. And this is the exact area that we want to focus in on. We'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so what you're looking at now, ladies and gentlemen, is an original sketch by Father Gill himself. This is his sketch. So again, 25 eyewitnesses. Now, about 30 minutes into this particular sighting, 2 of these beings went inside the deck of the craft, and there was this 45-degree angled blue-white colored light that shot off at about a 45-degree angle. That was seen as well. We'll move on to the next slide here, and we'll get some additional illustration. Now, this is a really good rendering by my good friend Tom Bogan, and you can see the men on the top deck of the craft. We see this 45-degree angle with this light blue, white colored light coming off at this angle. Very interesting. It's got to be top 5 UFO cases in the history of ufology for sure. We'll move on to the next slide now. Here's one particular drawing. So there's so many references for this. There's so many different drawings. International Reporter, they did a very good job on this. And you can see this is November 1977, International UFO Reporter, and you've got all the people in this mission who are watching this. Now, they were interviewed after this took place separately, and they basically were sort of interrogated and allowed to draw what the craft looked like individually. And when they brought these drawings together, they're really matched. So I think we can really bank on this case. We'll move on to the next slide here. Here's another depiction of what this sighting looked like. You can see these men on top with these 4 prongs coming out, or legs or landing gear, and this 2-tiered wedding cake. Bottom tier was 35 feet in diameter, upper tier was 20 feet in diameter. We'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, now this is an interesting case. June 29th, 1964, Georgia, Lavonia, Georgia, and this is 12 feet across. Now what happened here, we'll set this up. Primary eyewitness, and the reference is Uninvited Guest by Richard Hall, which is a very good publication. Primary eyewitness is driving down the road. It's about 7 p.m. at night. He's going between 65 and 70 miles an hour. And all of a sudden, this gold-colored top starts flying toward his car, actually parks itself right above his hood as he's going 65 miles an hour down the road. And this thing is just lockstep with his vehicle. It had tongues of flame coming out of the bottom of it. And he also said it had fins on the outer circumference as well. Now, what happened next is this thing took off and shot away. About 5 minutes later, it returned, and this time the engine on the car started sputtering out, and he actually pulled off to the side of the road, got out of the vehicle, and then this thing flew away. However, the effects that this craft made on his vehicle are very interesting. Number one, it crumpled the hood of the vehicle. That's number one. Number two, it deteriorated the paint on the hood. That's number two. Number three is it also left this oily residue that he said, his exact words, he said it smelled like embalming fluid. That's the word he used. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide here. Here's the reference, and we've got the newspaper clipping here. Man claims car buzzed by unknown object. And hopefully we'll be able to show where the reference is. Here it is. Index Journal, July 3rd, 1964. Man claims car buzzed by unknown object. So there is historical paperwork to back this up. We'll move on to the next slide here. All right, here we got another one. Another newspaper clipping. Greenville News, July 25th, 1964. Now this is his statement on top here. There was not a cloud in the sky, reports Parham. And then goes on here. Strange object was simply ball lightning, Air Force declares. Really? Ball lightning. Okay. If it's ball lightning, then please explain how it left an oily residue that smelled like embalming fluid on his hood and then burned his arm if it's ball lightning. Please explain this. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so for this case, it's May 1978, Wheelie, England. Primary eyewitness saw a spark of light. The reference for this is East Essex Gazette, January 12, 1979. He was out at night looking over across his farm field and he saw this brilliant light. He originally thought it was a helicopter. So what he ended up doing is he started walking toward this craft. He got within 20 yards of it and he saw this large saucer-shaped craft. It had a mushroom type for the dome on top. It had these slot, you could call them porthole windows going around the outer circumference of the craft. Then he said that there was a ramp that extended out from the main body of the craft. As he got a little bit closer, this ramp retracted in and then this craft took off. So he couldn't get any closer than that. But very good case, very interesting case. Now, I want to make one other announcement, and this is kind of a world exclusive. I have finally, ladies and gentlemen, put all of these cases into a book form that has just been dropped on Amazon. It's called Dark Files, A Pictorial History of Lost, Forgotten, and Obscure UFO Encounters. It's available on Amazon now. It's all fully illustrated. If anyone's been following my work, you'll know that I always include illustrations, drawings, sketches, the references, the paperwork, the newspaper clippings to back it up. It's all referenced. It's unprecedented. It's all in full color. It's unlike any other UFO book on the planet. So I hope you'll take a look at that, and I certainly want to thank you for your attention.
And that tells you that there is something out there.
Pretty hard to spoof that.
Absolutely. Los Alamos, Oak Ridge National Labs, MacDill Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, the remote test site in Nevada, also known as Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That's the actual terminology for Groom Lake facility.
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
I don't know who's building it, who's got the technology, who's got the brains, but there's something out there that better than our airplane.
So it's not us. That's one thing we know.
We know that.
I could say that with a very high degree of confidence.
For someone to try to bust down the walls, it's not going to happen. You'd have to go to all these facilities, get into their vaults, then bring that out as a united coalition. Not one person couldn't do it. It would take a united coalition of acknowledged scientists to come forward with it.